everybody, my name's Gary Wills and welcome to episode 35 of my YouTube channel. In this episode we'll be focusing on the Delivering Piedmont game that I presented at Partisan in 2024. The scenario deals with an element of the Battle of Mondovi of the 21st of April 1796. It's a 15mm black powder game. So in April 1796, Bonaparte launched his first campaign as an army commander in northern Italy. He attempted to force his army in between the two armies facing him, the Austrians on his right and the Sardinian Piedmontese troops on his left, and the Piedmontese are protecting their capital of Turin, which you can see ringed here. During April, a series of battles were fought which had the outcome of isolating the Sardinia Piedmontese army. And this map shows the approximate positions of the armies and their headquarters, with Bonaparte firmly ensconced between them and Turin off to the top left-hand corner of this map. Having isolated the Piedmontese army, the French were trying to drive them further away from the Austrians. The Piedmontese line of retreat was through the town of Mondovi, and Napoleon was going to harass them all the way. So this game and scenario focuses on the very early part of the battle, where the rearguard light troops of the Piedmontese army were positioned to fend off Serurier's attacking division. A key point to understand in relation to this scenario is that the function of the light troops from the Piedmontese was to give enough time for the main body of the Piedmontese army to form just behind Vicoforte, so that they're in a position to defend Mondovi properly in strength. So this shows the battlefield that we'll be setting the game on, and as I say, it focuses on that central hill where the Piedmontese light troops were in a position to hold off Serurier's initial attack. And here are 3 slides to show what the battlefield looks like today, courtesy of Google Earth. And on the small battlefield map on the left, you can see a sky blue triangle which shows you the approximate position of this viewpoint. It's actually on the bridge over the Torrente Cosaglia. And this is a bit further along the river in the centre of the Piedmontese position. You get a really good feel for the height and steepness of the terrain. And here's another shot further along still. And here's the order of battle for the French. As I say, this is a black powder game, so the battalions are classified as to whether they're large, small or standard, and you can see here that the division's organised into 3 brigades. A brigade commanded by Fiorella, one by Guillaume, and the 3rd by Don Martin, who was actually on loan from Augereau's division. Each of the brigades comprises 1 demi-brigade. These are fairly newly organised, and you can see that in the first 2 brigades there were 3 battalions. Don Martin only had 2 battalions. Each of the demi-brigades has some battalion guns, probably better called regimental guns, because they weren't allocated by battalion at this stage. The number of guns has been reduced from 6 per demi-brigade down to 4. For each of the brigades, I've organised tirailleur groups of skirmishers, which are drawn from the individual battalions, and these have been done according to an estimate based on Houchard's instructions for tirailleurs from a couple of years earlier. And here we have the Piedmontese order of battle, commanded by Brigadier Chevalier Civalieri, and he has a much smaller force of only 2,400 men, 74 figures, and it's made up entirely of light infantry. And the only exception to that is the battalion Casale is a provincial infantry regiment. While the French tirailleur units were able to deploy entirely as skirmishers, the situation is very different for the Piedmontese, even though these are light infantry. And I have decided, when I was setting the scenario, to, instead of allowing these units to deploy as entirely as skirmishers, to give them only the mixed a special rule under Black Powder, where only a third of the unit is deployed as skirmishers, and the rest stays in close order formation. And I need to say a bit more about why. So the Piedmontese were enamoured of the Prussian way of doing war, and to understand what that meant, here is something drawn from the 1788 Fusilier instructions. So these are the instructions for the Prussian light infantry. A lot is made of the fact that it wasn't the case that the Prussians didn't have skirmishers, they did. However, there was a difference between the way they used them and the way the French used them at this time. And what this shows you is a standard battalion with 4 companies, each of which has 2 platoons. So they have 8 platoons in the battalion. The way they would deploy for skirmishing is as shown in this diagram. So each of the flank platoons, the 1st and the 8th platoon, would advance forward and until they got to the last cover. And at that point, half the platoon would stand as a fixed reserve, which you be familiar with, and the rest of the men would move forward to actually disperse into skirmishers with about 4 to 5 paces between each file. What this means is that only an eighth of the battalion is actually deployed as skirmishers, and this is their light infantry battalions. And so that is quite different to the way in which the French behaved. There were also Schutzen in each of these companies, so 10 men per company, but they tended to be taken together and sent somewhere else. I could talk for a while about the way the Prussians skirmished, but this gives you some idea as to why I think mixed formation is most appropriate for the light troops of those armies that tended to follow the Prussian example, which, by the way, includes the British at this time. Okay, so let's say something about the terrain. Obviously, the hill on which all the fighting takes place is very wooded, and was at the time. Counts as rough ground and halves all movement except for skirmishers, and reduces visibility to 12 centimetres. I'm using centimetres rather than inches because of the 15mm figures. The steep slopes on the map, which are marked on the map, although I didn't point them out, are impassable to artillery, and close order infantry movement is reduced to 1/4 until the 600 metre contour is reached. So moving on to victory conditions. In the real action in 1796, Serurier was so successful in his attack on this position that the French got to Vicoforte, where the main Piedmontese position was trying to form, before that position was properly formed. And within a short while, despite some desperate defending on the Piedmontese part, the Piedmontese army was struggling back through Mondovi towards Turin, and the war would be over as far as the Piedmontese were concerned within a week. So to match Serurier's historical achievement, the French need to break the Piedmontese brigade and also get 6 of their units onto the Piedmontese table edge before the end of game turn 11, which is quite harsh, difficult, but I think it's only fair that all other results are a Piedmontese victory. So what I plan to do now is take you around the battlefield, looking at the starting position of all the troops. We'll start with the brigade that's not actually on the table at the beginning of the game, that of Dommartin. As you can see here, Dommartin's fairly young, 27, but has already been wounded in action, and he's been a general of the brigade for a couple of years. You can see in close up his 2 battalions of the 84th Demi Brigade, preceded by their skirmishers and accompanied by their artillery. As I said earlier, he's actually from Augereau's brigade and doesn't actually get to the battlefield until game turn 7. And we'll now move on to Guillau's brigade. With Guillaume for this this game, is the commander of the French Serurier, future Marshal of France. He's very experienced, 53 years old, and his battle honours go back to 1760. So he has a lot of experience and has fought well in the preceding campaigns of this war. And moving on to Guillaume, he's 37 years old, and he's had experience fighting the Spanish in the early years of the war before joining the Army of Italy. His Demi Brigade is the 19th. He has 3 battalions plus their skirmishers and artillery. And finally, for the French, we have Fiorella's brigade. Fiorella is 44, but again only been a general brigade for a couple of years and has served already on the Italian front, being wounded at Second Serurier. His Demi Brigade, 3 battalions of the 46th Demi Brigade with their skirmishers and artillery are shown here. And now moving on to the Piedmontese. So the right of the Sardinian line is held by the 1st Battalion of Elite Chasseurs of Nice. That translates that, and you can see them here. They're actually, the figures are actually American Revolution dismounted dragoons that just happen to suit the uniform that you can see on the right there. So now we move on to the centre of the Piedmontese position. Here, Colonel Colirici held the centre of the position with his own regiment of light infantry, and you can see him a bit closer here. The core of his troops were a converged regiment of the light companies of the line regiments, which were serving further back, which is a fairly 18th century way of doing things, but that's what they were. So they've all got slightly different uniforms as they represented the different line regiments. And here's a typical example of a Piedmontese uniform for its infantry. Either side of Colirici's men were companies of Free Corps or Corpo Franco, and these were recruited fairly recently as the war began, and they included some French royalists amongst their number. It's not clear to me what the uniforms were for all of these three companies. There is an illustration in the standard textbook on this army, which I've shown there. It's not obvious to me whether all of the companies were uniformed in the same way or whether they each did their own thing, because they were fairly autonomous units. And finally, let's look at the left of the Piedmont position. And this is where Serurier positioned himself. I've not been able to find very much about him. He seems to have been 56 years old at the time of the battle, and was part of the Regimento di Asti, and was recently promoted to Colonel Brigadier in 1795. The troops here were the 1st and 2nd Regiment of Chasseurs, and these had been called the Légion Reale Légère until 1795, and so you'll see mention of that in some of the histories. And here you can see a uniform of these troops, despite their light infantry role. Didn't go for any of this dark green nonsense. And finally, the one non-light infantry battalion is the 1st Battalion Reggimento Casale, which is in a reserve position further back. So let's go on with the game. So in summary, the French have to destroy the Piedmontese brigade and get half a dozen units off the table in order to claim victory. So the French went first. Let's have a look at how turn 1 ended up. So it started very inauspiciously for the French, as Fiorella's brigade failed its command test, and there was no re-roll available because Serurier wasn't with him, so they all stayed where they were. So looking at the Piedmontese on this sector of the battlefield, obviously the elite chasseurs were quite amused by this, watching on from afar. Guillaume was a bit more successful, managing to get his troops moving forward, the skirmishers splashing through the stream. The stream is in two parts here, the Torrente Corsaglia. Up at where Fiorella is, the stream's fordable anywhere, but further down it's only fordable for skirmishers, and therefore the bridge is quite important. It had been broken the day before, but Guillaume managed to fix it overnight with planks and the like. And the sky blue tokens here denote the change of formation from attack columns into column of march to get across the narrow bridge. There's not much for the Sardinians to do at this point as they look on and try and engage in early musketry. And on the other flank, nothing was happening because Don Martin is still slogging his way towards the battlefield. For the Piedmontese, the Casale battalion starts to move forward to be in a position to better support the light infantry. So let's move on to turn 2. Again, Fiorella failed his command test and his brigade remained static. Obviously some confusion arising in the French staff work. So Guillaume manages to get his men further forwards, starting to cross the bridge and get his light infantry up the steep slopes in front of them. So the French artillery opens fire on the Piedmontese light infantry, causing some disorder. And the Piedmontese turn, the Casale battalion continues its forward movement to bring some support to Colli-Ricci. And the fire from Colli-Ricci's skirmishers draws the first blood as the first casualty is called on the French tirailleurs. So let's move on to turn 3. So Fiorella finally got moving. 3 moved turn, a very successful command test, and gets his skirmishers and at least two of his battalions forward with their supporting artillery. However, the 3rd Battalion was outside of the brigade move distance and had to be ordered separately, and this was a failure. For the Sardinians, or the Piedmontese, the elite chasseurs of Nice, trying to hold their nerve as the French torrent approaches them. So the Guillot's skirmishers struggle up the steep slopes, supported by the close order infantry unit, which are trying to get into the centre of the Piedmont position. So in the centre, the Casale battalion is continuing movement into reinforce Colerici, whose skirmishers are taking pot shots at the approaching French. Meanwhile, on the French right, Civialeri awaits the arrival of Damartin's brigade. So moving now on to turn 4. Here's an overview of the table at the end of turn 4. A bad turn for the French this turn. Fiorella, having got all excited in the previous turn, again failed his command test and was unable to move his men further forward. And the elite chasseurs of Nice watched on amused. This time Guillot also failed his command test and his troops were going nowhere fast. So the Piedmontese are happy with this. They don't have to do very much, just bringing forward the Casale battalion finally into the centre of their position. And they even managed to disorder Guillot's tirailleurs. On the French right, Civialeri can be pretty happy he's got this far without too much damage from the French. So let's move on to turn 5. So Fiorelli finally gets his men moving again, and his close order battalions looking for the slightly less steep slopes at the end of the Piedmontese position. And the elite chasseurs of Nice look on, taking pot shots at the oncoming tirailleurs through the trees. Looking now at the centre of the position, Guillot's men struggling to get up the steep slopes and having crossed the defile of the bridge. Meanwhile, the Piedmontese are holding quite a long front, peppering the oncoming French tirailleurs. And still, obviously, not much happening on the French right. Moving on to turn 6, halfway through the action. So starting again with Fiorella, his men are slowly getting into action against the elite chasseurs of Nice. And this photograph shows the same position from the other side of the table. And the firing between the two sets of skirmishers has resulted in some casualties on both sides, denoted by the green token. So in the centre, Guillot very slowly getting his men up the steep slopes and into position to start their attack. And this photograph shows the same attack from the other side of the table, and you can see at least some casualties have been inflicted on the Piedmontese as the infantry struggle forward. Piedmontese holding their position, hoping to be able to repel the oncoming assault. On the French right, Civialeri can now see Damartin's battalions on the edge of the battlefield. So now moving on to game turn 7. So this is an overview of the table at the end of turn 7. So on the left, Fiorella's men have charged up the slopes and heading for the elite chasseurs of Nice. In doing so, they've driven off the Piedmontese skirmishers, but were unable to make contact with the main line itself. Similarly, in the centre, Guillot's men drove off the Corpo Franco's skirmishers, drove them back to their main line as they tried to struggle up the slopes. And here's a close-up of the French columns storming, if that's the right word, up the slopes towards the Free Corps. Even so, the French have managed to inflict casualties on the Free Corps, which are there shaken, and the Nice and the Coleridge skirmishes in the background. On the French right, the Daumartin's battalion makes its way tentatively onto the battlefield. As you can see in this close-up shot, they only really got one move onto the table. So moving on to turn 8. So finally, on the French left, the French infantry have got into contact. Those of the 46th Demi Brigade have charged in, and despite becoming disordered in the closing fire, have broken the elite chasseurs of Nice. And in the centre, Guyot's men continue to establish themselves up the hill in face of the Piedmontese light infantry. On the French right, the further progress of Daumartin's brigade, not helped by the lead battalion becoming disordered due to the Piedmontese skirmish fire. Okay, so let's move straight on to turn 9. So on the French left, Fiorella's men, fresh from their victory, are pushing on over the hill towards the Piedmontese baseline. And here in close up you can see the movement of the Fiorella's men, who obviously got some casualties despite outnumbering the Nice chasseurs so strongly. In the centre, Guyot's men charged home and broke the Free Corps company that was to their front. Here in close-up you can see that Guyot's formed columns are now in a great position to turn the flank of Coleridge's men. On the French right, Daumartin's brigade has not made any progress in their advance. And this shows Daumartin's man from a slightly different angle. So we're getting towards the end of the game now. Let's see what happened at the end of game turn 10. And Fiorella's men continued their bad run of poor command tests and failed to exploit their advantage. And here's a close-up of Fiorella's advancing brigade, or in this case not advancing brigade. Moving now to the centre of the French line. In the centre of the line, Guyot's men are driving towards Coleridge's chasseur battalion. Meanwhile, on the French right, one of Daumartin's battalions charges in and forces back one of the Piedmontese light infantry battalions. Right, so let's move on to the final turn, turn 11. And here you can see an overview of the battle as it finished. And we'll start by looking at Fiorella's brigade off in the distance. And here you can see them hurriedly heading for the Piedmontese table edge. However, they were a couple of moves short of that target. And moving into the centre with Guyot's troops, and Guyot's infantry charged home on Coleridge's battalion. And here you can see a close-up of the action. After the combat, both sides were shaken. And on the French right, Daumartin's infantry broke the light infantry battalion before them and turned to face the flank of the remainder of the Piedmontese line. And here's a close-up of the final position, with the French facing off against the Chasseurs and Grenadiers of what was the Royal Legion of Light Troops. So at the end of the game, at the end of turn 11, 3 of the Piedmontese infantry battalions had been broken, and there was another unit on the battlefield shaken. So all in all, the Piedmontese brigade was broken, fulfilling one of the French victory conditions. So now we come to the result. And here's a reminder of the victory conditions. The French needed to break the Piedmontese brigade and get 6 of their units onto the Piedmontese table edge. As we've just seen, the French did indeed break the Piedmontese brigade, but they didn't get any of their units onto the Piedmontese table edge before the end of the game. And consequently, the game ended up as a Piedmontese victory, with the light troops deemed to have delayed Serurier long enough to give the main defensive line time to organise. So that was the result of the morning game. We did play it again in the afternoon. And here's an overview of the table at the end of the second game. And you can see here that Fiorella's brigade at the top of the picture and Guillau's brigade made similar sorts of progress to what we saw in the first game. And you can see here the final result. The French in this second game had 2 shaken units, but the Piedmontese brigade had 4 broken units and therefore was broken. So again, the result was the same. The French did break the Piedmontese, but they didn't get off the table, and so it was a Piedmontese victory. So in conclusion, I'd like to wrap up with a few remarks. It was a pretty quick game. Even in show conditions, we managed to get it done in 2¼ hours. So in order for the French to win in this scenario as I'd built it, they needed to use more road movement and column of march where necessary to ensure victory. Obviously, in the game we went through in detail, there were 2 or 3 moves lost by Fiorella's men with the failed command test, which might have gone the other way with better dice rolling. So for the nerds amongst you, it shows this chart is one of my nerdy ones, which looks at the effective staff rating on the French, because they could have been given a higher staff rating on the number of moves they'd get over 11 turns, whether they're in road march column or not. And also looks at the transit across the battlefield, and you can see that just plodding through the steep slopes makes it very difficult to get there in 11 turns. You really need to avoid the steep slopes when you can, and push on through as much as you can. Obviously, going by a road through Molina, which is an option, just to circumvent the whole position, was a surefire way of getting across the battlefield. One of the things I hadn't really considered too strongly when I went through the special rules for the Piedmontese is one of the things that affects the mixed formations is that they can't move at skirmish speed. They have to move at the speed of the close order unit. So technically they are slower than the French tirailleurs, and that's an interesting thing that really came out of playing this game. In the real battle, it looks likely that the Piedmontese light infantry didn't stand their ground as they did in this refight. It's likely that they withdrew without much fighting. I say that because they actually covered the Piedmontese withdrawal through Mondovi on the position around Vicoforte, and that probably wouldn't have been possible if they'd have been up to their knees in French skirmishers on the position that we fought the game over. However, even though they did that, they obviously failed in their main mission, which was to keep the French at bay until Colli had got the main Piedmontese line established behind Vicoforte. So they ought to have fought like the guys fought in this free fight. And a final point about the mixed formation for the Piedmontese, they end up actually getting more firepower than their in their skirmish element than likely, because they obviously get 1 dice under the black powder rules, whereas normally they would probably only get a quarter of a dice, whatever that looks like. I just want to finish up the video with a gallery of photographs that other people have taken of James and I playing the game, and hopefully you'll enjoy these.
Ah ça ira, ça ira, ça ira. Le peuple en ce jour sans cesse répète. Ah ça ira, ça ira, ça ira. Malgré les mutins tout réussira. Nos ennemis confiants restent là. Et nous allons chanter Alléluia. Ah ça ira, ça ira, ça ira. Qu'envoie-nous jadis du clergé par là. Comme un prophète, il prédit cela. En chantant ma chansonnette. Avec plaisir, on dira, ah ça ira, ça ira, ça ira, ça ira, malgré les mutins, tout réussira. Ah ça ira, ça ira, ça ira, suivant la maxime de l'évangile. Ah ça ira, ça ira, ça ira, du législateur tout s'accomplira. Celui qui s'élève, on l'abaissera, celui qui s'abaisse, on l'élèvera. Ah ça ira, ça ira, ça ira, le vrai catéchisme nous instruira, et l'affreux fanatisme s'éteindra, pour être à la loi docile. Tout français s'exercera. Ah ça ira, ça ira, ça ira, ça ira, malgré les mutins, tout réussira. Ah ça tiendra, ça tiendra, ça tiendra. On va trop bien le nouer pour que ça se délie. Ah ça tiendra, ça tiendra, ça tiendra. Et dans 2000 ans on s'en souviendra. Le despotisme expirera, la liberté triomphera. Ah ça ira, ça ira, ça ira. Nous n'avons plus ni noble ni prêtre. Ah ça ira, ça ira, ça ira. L'égalité régnera. L'esclave autrichien le suivra. Ah ça ira, ça ira, ça ira, ça ira.